Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, Mehr. Nice to see you.
So before we start, I'd like to give you a formal introduction and just tell everyone about everything that you've done over over these couple of years. Today we have with us Dr. Anjhula Singh Bais, an academic, human rights activist, a former model, a feminist, as well as an international psychologist. Dr. Anjhula, you're not just an inspiration for me, but several other aspiring teenagers, specializing in trauma, founder and director of Fourth Dimension Consultancy and a director of Amnesty International. We're so grateful to have you here today and answer pertinent questions regarding mental health as well as ADHD, which my friends and I and several other teenagers have over the months of this lockdown. In school, we've had lots of seminars regarding mental awareness, mental health, but we still had so many questions that remained unanswered. And I was hoping that you could come here today and answer those questions, because I feel like during the months of these lockdowns, all of us have understood the importance of mental health, especially I have. So we're so grateful to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I think what you're doing is an excellent initiative. And I am so glad to hear that you and your friends are really thinking about mental health and taking it seriously. So good.
Okay, so we've collected a lot of questions that we've had over these couple of months. So, in your opinion, is there any like one particular cause for mental health problems, or are they like really broad?
Wouldn't that be amazing if there were? And then that we knew what it was and then it would be solved. But that's not the case, right? So, I mean, actually, in a way, what makes it so interesting to be a psychologist is that no 2 days in the office are alike, right? So even if I see multiple people, for example, in therapy with depression, the diagnosis, if you will, might be the same, but the reasons for it are so different. You know, it might be a bereavement, somebody passed away. It might be a breakup that went really, really badly. It might be a financial loss. It might be physical health, right? So there's in psychology, we talk about comorbidity. So a lot of times, mental health issues are not in isolations. A lot of times, anxiety accompanies depression.
Mm-hmm.
Something else accompanies something else. Scientists are always trying to do research to find out more about mental health. I mean, the brain is the least understood of like all body parts, if you will. Um, but basically, I would say that it is a combination of nurture versus nature. So
100%.
in one sense, you could, for example, have a genetic predisposition, let's say, to depression or anxiety. Literally, that's a genetic thing that maybe runs in the family. But if you are raised in an environment that is stable, in a country that doesn't have political issues and maybe is at war, the depression's actually not as likely, for example, to come out. Whereas another person doesn't have any genetic predisposition, but they live in Syria.
Mm-hmm.
So then, with all the bombing and the trauma, even if you don't have a genetic
You might just
link,
accept it.
exactly. So it's not a cut and dry answer.
Yeah, definitely. And then after that, I personally presume that if a person is happy, they probably have good mental health. That is just like what I presume for the longest time. But my question is that can like good mental health be equated with happiness, or are they just two completely different things?
That's a good question. It's an interesting question. Um, I would say no. I think people typically would say if you're like the sort of simplistic layperson understanding is if you're happy, you must have great mental health, and if you're
Probably.
upset, you don't have it, right? Or as in you don't have good mental health. And a lot of times, well-meaning family members or loved ones or friends will say, no, you have so much to be thankful for. Just get over it. It's in your mind, think yourself out of it. But if it were that simple, everybody would do
Good.
that. No one chooses to feel on purpose depression or anxiety. In fact, it's very interesting. Like my dissertation was actually on the top 1% of social economic strata, like the richest of the richest. And that was in part because people think if you have money, you don't have problems. How could you have a mental health issue? It's almost like you don't deserve to have depression, or how could you don't even deserve to say you have problems because you have food on the table. But that's not how mental health works. It's equal opportunity, right? And here's the thing. I mean, we're in 2020, and I think, a lot of times on social media, there's just this think positive, affirmation,
Yeah.
happiness, and I call it the post positivism sort of self-help sellout, because that doesn't work. Okay, if you don't get into, let's say, maybe the school of your dreams and you worked really hard, or you went through a particularly difficult breakup, or COVID made you miss your graduation or you miss your friends, how would you like it if someone's like, but be happy, Mayor, just be happy, and if you're not happy, you have mental health problems?
Yeah,
No.
I've seen similar posts like these on
And
Instagram
that's
as well.
no. And
No.
I'll get into that probably later in our conversation, but basically, good mental health means actually feeling your feelings, not trying to repress them, not trying to suppress them, not trying to be happy at all costs, because then you're pushing it down.
Mhm.
Good mental health is realizing what you're feeling, it's being able to name what you're feeling, right? So it's being aware, like going, okay, hey, wait a second, I'm feeling really sad. Or, I can feel my chest constrict and I'm feeling cortisol is at the beginning of a panic attack. Okay, well, what have I spoken about with my therapist, or what are techniques I've learned? I'm
Mhm.
going to apply them and I can get through this. That is good mental health. It's
Yeah.
not the avoidance of things. You can't avoid life. Life will happen. And it's ecologically appropriate, for example, to feel very sad about things that are happening with COVID or in the world. But the good mental health is not getting so devastated by that we can't move forward. But I think what happens is well-meaning aunties and uncles are like, you're overthinking, and you're like, that's not what this is about.
Yeah, no, I think almost everyone has gone through that once or twice. Okay, so I have a lot of friends who think that they suffer from depression, even though it's like, you go on the internet and you see, oh, symptoms for depression are this, and then you try to correlate them with what you're feeling, and then you all of a sudden become this psychologist at home where you're like, oh, I most probably have depression, and then you end up, and with me this happens so much when I feel like I don't have temperature, but when I go online and I keep searching things, or maybe like a condition, I make myself believe that I have it, and then I start feeling the symptoms of it.
Yeah.
So how reliable is online diagnosis, or is it important to go to a psychologist or a psychiatrist and figure out what you really have?
Yeah, I mean, well, it's a common phenomenon. First, I will tell you that what you're experiencing and what you're doing actually highlights the power of the mind. A lot of times people think, the mind and the body are separate, right?
Hmm.
But by virtue of what you're thinking and what you're consuming online, you're literally making yourself sick. So for example, I tell my therapy clients, just like you wouldn't eat junk food or chips, potato chips, Doritos or whatever all the time, you get physically sick. What are you consuming all the time?
Yeah.
What are you watching on social media? What are you watching on Netflix? What fashion magazine or something are you reading right before bed? It affects the subconscious. I mean, in fact, to all your friends or people who watch and listen to this, I would really recommend watching the paradoxical on Netflix, this show about social media that was made by people who develop social media, like the
Yeah,
people from
social
Twitter.
dilemma, social dilemma, yeah.
Correct, correct, because it's what psychologists have known all along. It's extremely manipulative, right? So I always tell clients, curate your social media feeds very carefully. Like, think about following, let's say, National Geographic and photos of animals and nature. um, Otherwise, you really start mentally suffering, and uninstall social media,
Mhm.
and people start improving. But to answer directly your question,
Yeah.
the internet, along with anything else, is a double-edged sword. It depends what you do with it, right? So I'm not going to say Twitter is, if you say it's bad or good, that's very polarized thinking. It's very black and white. Twitter is what you make of it to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
I could be sitting there taking a selfie of myself all day with like a duck face and going, oh my God, look at me. Or I can be talking about human rights. It's a choice,
True.
right? And trying to maybe educate people.
Mm-hmm.
So, in one way, the internet has leveled the playing field. I like the fact that more people have access to knowledge, but all knowledge is not created equally. So, there's a lot of people that are like, I've gone through a couple divorces or breakup, and my friends love me, so I'm like really good at counseling people. And then they're self-professed, but you don't have a clue, which is why I think where you consume, like if you're reading something from the New England Journal of Medicine, if you're reading the Lancet, if you're reading certain, very accredited sources, that's okay. Um, but it's not for you to interpret. You need to leave that to an expert.
100%.
You can measure your pulse, but if you think you're having a heart attack, or are you going to like self-administer CPR or have your mom and dad do that? You're going to obviously go to a
A
cardiologist.
hospital. Mm-hmm.
So it's great to be aware. I may or may not have it, but leave it to the experts. They're actually an expert for a reason. And I
Yeah.
think people should have that intellectual humility. I think it's extremely dangerous. I can't tell you how many people, you mentioned modeling. It's so interesting to me that when someone's done being a model or an actress or an actor or whatever, um, how often they go into the field of counseling or psychologist. They haven't really gone into the field, but they call themselves that. I can name you so many people. I'm not going to, but I could. So it's interesting. Like you're finished being a model. No one says, and now I'm a rocket scientist. But somehow people think it's easy to call yourself a psychologist. So I know tons of ex-models that have never studied it formally, that don't have the license, don't have the accreditation, don't have the credentials, but they think they can take someone's heart and minds in their hands. And it's very intense. When somebody is suicidal, are you trained for that?
No, yeah.
And the problem with that is, that doesn't happen too much in the West. But in India, for example, to your listeners in India, mental health is very unregulated, right? So the word psychologist in US, in the UK, that's a protected title. You literally cannot say that unless you have a PhD. And even all PhDs are not from accredited universities, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's these factory mills. You can get a PhD from, I'm not going to name countries, but where you've never attended, but they're like, here's a PhD. It's called a diploma farm. So basically, and this is why I think it's a great question you ask. You need to be an informed consumer when you sign up for um, mental health services. In India, I know people who have studied homeopathy, but they think they're a psychologist.
Just because they've given out advice once or twice.
Yeah, no, correct. And they call themselves that, and they're actually working at hospitals. And I think the fault lies with the hospitals. How come the hospitals didn't clearly vet that? I could literally make a list of people in India, and maybe someday I should bring it to the authorities. It's a very serious matter.
Probably. And as long as we're on this topic as well, while we're talking about social media, um, when you make an Instagram feed or you go to Pinterest, there are like few criteria that you select: your interests, your hobbies, and normally, like all my friends and I, we pick the, what do we say, topics of these Instagram influencers, and they're posting about body image, self-esteem, etc. But you've never seen anyone with a, I don't know, more perfect body, and that shows up on your feed. And it see, you can take it in like two ways. That one, you can like work on yourself, that I want a healthy diet, I want to exercise daily, or you can get depressed. So there are so many people that I know as well who suffer with self-esteem issues and body image issues, and they're like, I don't like the way I look, I don't like the way I don't like my weight, because of what they see on the internet. And it's not even like they feel like it's actually like a thing, that there's this like ideal body type for a woman, and there's this ideal face, there's these like ideal things that she must know. And that puts so much pressure on like every one of us, that you don't know what to do. Like, do I speak to someone about it? Do do I go on the internet? Do I write my feelings down? Or what would be your advice as an expert in this field to anyone who faces these issues, or any woman, or even a boy who faces these issues? Because I feel like social media has definitely given that like ideal body type, that ideal face, and then you just look at yourself and you're like, I don't need that. I don't meet that criteria, and then you just feel bad about yourself, and then you don't know what to do.
Well, I mean, again, a really spot on question, and very topical. I speak to young women, and you're right, it can be men, but it's actually usually more women, and that's by design. And I'll get into that in a second. But in terms of what to do, sort of all of the above, right? So A, talk to a professional. B, writing your feelings down can be really cathartic, because it's impossible usually to feel one particular way for like 24 hours. You might feel bad, and then you write it down. And then when you're feeling a little bit, let's say, better, or your self esteem is feeling a little bit higher, and then you write that and you're like, wait a second, let me reflect on that. What was I thinking, or what mood I was in? It serves as a record, and it's actually a good data point. But here's the thing, like, especially in South Asia and Southeast Asia, a lot of the learning modules are based on um, sort of rote memorization, right? Rote learning.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's teaching us how to critically think.
Yeah.
Now, haven't you found it very fascinating that though the patriarchy will try to tell you that a woman's place is in the kitchen,
Mm-hmm.
the highest paid chefs and the biggest celebrity chefs are men. Women are constantly being policed for their body. But the most successful fashion designers, whether in India that I've walked for, or abroad, they're all men. Dolce Gabbana, men, right? Louis Vuitton, everybody, men. Who is calling the shots in these advertising companies and editors of magazines? Men. If more women were designing, if more women were the heads of advertising agencies, we would see more inclusivity, right? There's all types of beauty. For example, when I've done field work in Africa, the African women would laugh and they're like, is your husband feeding you? Like, you're too skinny. That's not beauty type in Africa. They did not literally find my body type beautiful. In London, the ideal is like size zero. Okay. In the US, when I was studying, my skin color is what people spend thousands of dollars on to attain, getting a tan, right? Risking cancer, tanning beds. And then we go to India, where I refuse to do a Fair and Lovely advertisement, because why are you bleaching your skin? It's $1 billion industry.
Yeah.
So if you really look at it, nothing's good enough for anywhere in the world. And my question that I'd ask to you and your friends are, why have we given our power away? Who has made this person an authority or the benchmark?
We have.
Exactly. So take it back. Like, great that Kim Kardashian wants to do what she wants to do, but why is she the benchmark of what to be? One day I really got tired of saying, or thinking and saying and feeling like you have to be a certain way as a model. I mean, I have literally had modeling agencies say, can you dumb it down a little? You're intimidating. I'm like, I'm not going to dumb anything down. If they want to book me for a job, book me, because I'm a brand and I'm a brain. And if you happen to think I'm beautiful, great. If you don't, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I literally said no to Fair and Lovely. And then you know what the paradoxical thing is? There was a whole segment of people who thought that was fascinating. And I got more coverage than I would have if I did Fair and Lovely. Al Jazeera, academic papers were written on the fact that this dusky model said no.
No.
I had 15-year-olds write to me and say, you give me hope because my parents have always told me you're dark, no one will marry you, but look at you.
Yeah.
Because it's ridiculous. Why we have to take our power back?
Mm-hmm.
Who's calling the shots? Why are we doing this for the male gaze? Literally it's for men.
True.
And a lot of times women, even my girlfriends who have won this pageant, that pageant, scored very highly in the Miss Universe and Miss World, they're like, no, Anjhula, feminism is choice, and I'm doing this by my own choice. And I'm like, that's what you think. but your choices are circumscribed by men who
Mm-hmm.
are the head of everything, whether they're chairing the board, they're the head of advertising, marketing. If women were there, you would see how different it is. That's why we need more women leaders. And
Yeah.
I would actually again recommend, why don't you and your friends watch, all young women listening to you? It's a bit old, a couple years, but it's still very worth watching. And I tell the young women I speak to in therapy, it's on Netflix and it's called Misrepresentation. I would really recommend watching that,
I would
because and then maybe we can have a follow-up talk about that.
100%. And so like I said, lots of my friends go on the internet, they see depression is this, and then they feel like, what, I suffer from it. So, but if my friend does suffer from it, is there anything that I could do to help him or her feel better? Because when someone tells me that they're feeling low, I sometimes I don't even know how to react. Like, I don't want to say anything that's going to hurt their feelings. I don't want to act cold. Or when I say, what, why don't you take your time, I don't want to act like I'm being distant from you just because you've expressed your feelings to me. And this is something that all of us we face in school, because we all of us have our own battles that we're fighting continuously, and when you talk about it to another person, you expect a good response, but the other person doesn't know what that good response is, because you don't want to hurt the other person's feelings, you don't want to sound insensitive towards them, you want to help them but you don't know what to do. So in this case, what can you really do to help the other person or show your support to them?
Again, a really excellent question. I don't think there's a one size fits all, right? So I
Definitely.
think a part of it is, it's a bit of a science, a bit of an art. I think a part of it is how well you know your friend and trying to read the situation to the best of your ability. So if you have a friend that maybe identifies as an introvert,
Mm-hmm.
they may not want to really talk it out, right?
No, 100%
So
they wouldn't.
yeah, so creating a holding space where sometimes just your presence as you sip a coffee or whatever tea together without any words exchanged can be comforting, right? Just togetherness where we don't have to fill up the space. But maybe your extrovert friends, like, I don't want advice, I just want to vent, or I
Mm-hmm.
just want to cry while someone holds my hand. I mean, again, there's no right or wrong, but I think sometimes the least helpful thing you can do is not do anything at all. And a lot of people, for example, when there's bereavement or something traumatic, or they don't know what to do, they just shut down and they become quiet. And it's like this ostrich syndrome. I sort of bury my head. I can't see anything. No one can see me. I'm going to pretend it didn't happen. Pink elephant, the worst thing you can do for the
Yeah.
most part. It can be really helpful to say, this is kind of the first time I'm experiencing this and I don't know what to do. Tell me what you need. That can be very helpful. Um, Anything you need, I'm there for you. If you need me to speak, I'll speak. If you need me to listen, I mean, even let's take it out of a depression context. Sometimes when a friend is just going through a stressful time, I make sure to ask them, I go, is this conversation, do you want me to just listen or do you want advice?
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're like, help me out, I can't, like, how do I do this?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's not at all what they want. They just want someone to listen.
True.
So just asking. But then I will also tell you that as much as we want to help our loved ones, it's not our job to fix them, to change them, to be their therapist. That's a journey that they're on,
Mm-hmm.
and no one else can do that for them.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, all we can do is witness somebody's life.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you feel like it's too much for you because you have things going on,
Mm-hmm.
you have every right to assert your boundaries. Be like, I want to help you and I love you, but there is so much on my plate.
Yeah.
But these are numbers or people that you can speak to, because that is a therapist's job.
Exactly. You don't want to become a therapist, especially when
No.
you don't know what you're doing really.
Yeah.
So before we get into like the ADHD aspect of it, and also the question that was basically related to online diagnosis as well as psychiatric diagnosis. So my younger brother, when he was in school, he used to get distracted a lot, and the teachers used to complain on a daily basis that even if we make him sit next to a person who's so focused, he will distract that person as well, or he's so restless, he's so hyperactive. could he potentially have ADHD? Why don't you take him to a psychologist or a counselor or a therapist? And my mother got really paranoid, because you wouldn't want a teacher telling you that, you know what, your son has a problem. So she took him to a counselor or a psychologist, I don't remember, um, the school recommended. And they diagnosed him with all sorts of things. And they said, you know what, he faces this problem, he faces that problem. You need to have lots of sessions or counseling. And she just came back crying because she didn't know what to do. And she didn't expect him to have any problem as such. But all he needed was attention. All he needed was attention and love. And then he was on the right track, and he was absolutely fine. He was focused, he was driven. And this happened to an 8-year-old child, just because teachers thought they knew what they were doing. And the effect that it had on him was so severe. He was just like, he would ask my mother that, is there a problem with me, am I not normal? So the effect that it can have on someone, just because they don't know what they're doing, or like a teacher just telling a child in school that, you know what, why don't you go to a counselor, especially like an 8-year-old kid, it has such a big impact on their life. So that is why, all of these disorders, dyslexia, ADHD, etc., everything that can impact a child during their academic life is so important. And that's why I have a few questions for you. So there's no like single test for ADHD diagnosis. So how do psychologists differentiate between like a child just, being kiddish or being really excited, and ADHD?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny because, I mean, first of all, thank you for sharing that personal context. I would refrain actually from thinking about it as normal or abnormal, or something's wrong with me, or if someone asks to recommends one to see a counselor, it doesn't necessarily need to be the end of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, children also take their cues from their parents and their environment. So if, for example, the parents are crying and panicking, then the child goes, oh my goodness, something's wrong.
Wrong with me.
You know, if a parent's like, okay, well, we go to the, GP once a year, we go to the foot doctor, we'll also go to the counselor, let's have a chat.
Yeah.
That's a much more neutral way of handling it. And I mean, obviously, the teachers are not probably trained in mental health, but I do think it's an improvement from where many countries used to be, where they would just hit or punish the child, being like, you're just naughty, you're not focusing.
Mhm.
You know, it's actually a good thing and an improvement where teachers are still educated enough about mental health where they're like, this could be an issue, check it out, as
Check it
opposed to
out.
you're just
Yeah. Yeah.
rotten kid.
Hmm.
So I actually think it's a good thing. Um, in answer to your question, so sometimes, I mean, ADHD in a way is easier to diagnose, if you will, in children than it is adults. You leave that to the experts. I mean, each practitioner will probably have a slightly different way of approaching it,
Hmm.
which is why I think getting a second opinion generally is a good idea. If you have doubt or just because you want to, it's a great idea. I tell my clients, get a second opinion, no problem.
Uh-huh.
Um, but one of the ways that you sort of try to understand whether it's a diagnosis or it's just a phase
Hmm.
is you really get into the history of the child. This is why you talk to the parents, you understand the family or environmental dynamics. So for example, if a child is experiencing divorce, most of the time without fail, children, because they don't have the cognitive ability yet to sort of rationalize, a lot of times children think that a divorce of their parents is their fault.
Hmm.
And a lot of times parents are preoccupied with maybe a court battle, or maybe they're fighting each other, or it's very intense. And can you understand then how children are not getting attention? So a lot of times it involves psychosocial educating the parents. Even in this day and age, a lot of people think, well, we sit down together and have dinner, but you're on your phones. There's this, we're giving iPads and phones to increasingly younger children to do homework, and this is really distracting them and having uh, serious effects on attention. So all I would say is you're not going to ascertain with one visit to a psychologist. It might take several visits to understand what's going on and get a second opinion.
Yeah. And
And I think it's a combination of things, just by the way.
mhm,
It could be a phase. They might grow out of it. Maybe, maybe not. It could obviously be what's going on in the family. And it also could be things like diet. For example, in America, much older buildings made in the 60s and 70s actually had lead in their paint. And so that lead, like, it would chip off the paint and it would be inhaled by young children who are neurologically developing. And they went on to have ADHD. So it's environmental toxins,
as
which
well.
is why when I practice psychology, a lot of times actually every time I'm asking my clients, what is your diet like? What's your environment like? Are you exposed to lead? Are you exposed to mercury? What's in your drinking water? How much fluoride? All of these things play a part. I mean, just think about it
Mm,
intuitively. If you have a healthy, well-rounded diet on, vegetables and so on and so forth, versus being fed McDonald's every day since you're young, who do you think is going to have better mental health?
the first one.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so, like you said, that even the way like my mom reacted, like it was like it was like a huge surprise to her. So initially she was like hysterical and Jerome didn't know what was going on. But um, after that,
But what, with
mhm,
respect to your mom, why
mhm,
the hysteria? See, the children are
yeah,
absorbing that and they're watching that. We literally, your nervous systems take their cue from the adults. And the expectation that nothing would be wrong with your child, how can we go through life with the expectation that things won't happen?
hmm, no, absolutely,
Better mental health
yeah,
is assuming I can handle anything that comes my way.
yeah. But like again, no matter how much you say, oh, you know what, um, raise awareness for mental health or break the stigma, that's still like embedded in all of us. I don't know how to explain it like
Oh, I
correctly
get
or
it.
properly, but no
Get
matter
it.
what you say, that you know what, all body types are great, or everyone is beautiful, or beauty is on the inside, or I don't have any problem with anyone who has mental health issues. I would like to raise awareness for this. That little stigma of someone having it is still like inside of you. And when you find out that your child has it, no matter how open you are, no matter how positive you are, you're still like, uh-oh. And
Well, I
yeah.
mean, that's everybody's response is valid.
Mm-hmm.
But I will say definitively the uh-oh is fundamentally a choice.
Yeah.
We're not born thinking uh-oh. Okay? You can have a child that identifies as gay or lesbian. Now, depending on how you've worked on your own self as a parent and in life, that will then determine how you receive your child who identifies as gay.
Yeah.
Like, great, more power to you. Love who you want to love.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you, I would say that to my child. There
Yeah.
would not be even 0.1% of an uh-oh. What is there to be uh-oh about? But that is because I have trained myself.
Yeah.
And we don't train ourselves. We're so busy going to the gym, getting a bikini or beach ready body. We want to tone our muscles. But what we need to realize is our brain is also a muscle, and most people let it become flabby.
Mm-hmm.
Tone your brain. It's a choice how you choose to respond. That's the basic tenet of psychology.
Yeah.
So, you were not born thinking
Mm-hmm.
ADHD is bad. You've been conditioned to think that. Over the years, people have fed that. Society, media, your own parents, whatever. Now it's our job individually
Mm-hmm.
to okay, basically let me put it this way.
Mm-hmm.
That is learned behavior. You have to unlearn it. And it is totally possible. I see that all the time in therapy. People start in therapy with whatever set of, sort of cognitive dysfunctions, in like a half a year or a year after therapy, they're a completely different person.
Wow.
And I will tell you honestly, I haven't met a single parent who should not be in therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Every parent, in as a means of understanding themselves and being a good parent, should absolutely get therapy. When you get therapy, that doesn't mean something's wrong. That just means you want to take your life to the next level.
Level. Mm-hmm. So you even when you go online for ADHD, when I was doing my research, there are lots of tests online. on very famous websites, talking about, do you do you, you might just have ADHD, take the following test and you're going to get your result. So would you say that that specific test, I don't know if you've come across any of them, but they usually ask you about how restless you are during the day, do you have sudden spurts of energy, or they have questions like these, what is your attention span rated from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. So as like a child or a teenager, would you rather go to, like, it's just like a simple choice, would you rather just take that test and get like a brief idea, or formally visit a psychologist, get the treatment that you need, get the help that you need, but because of all of these barriers as such that we've been restricted in, what would be better?
Yep.
Mhm,
Well, I mean, as a young person, there are barriers. I mean, not only just in terms of stigma, but maybe financially
mhm,
or transportation wise. In some countries, it might not be safe, for example, to um, procure mental health services. This is why, so I do all my sessions online, right? And I think that can be a very good thing because in a lot of ways there's anonymity.
mhm,
You're not waiting in a doctor's office, waiting room, hospital, public, not public, but records, right? Like your cardiologist can see that at Max Med Center, hypothetically, you went to the psychiatrist,
mhm.
and then maybe people speak or whatever. So actually, the internet in this way is um, a there's a positive. You can speak to people from the comfort and privacy of your home,
Mhm.
but there's no reason you can't do both.
Yeah.
If you want to get an idea and go, what's going on, that's a very expedient, fast way to go. Maybe there's something
Mhm.
up, but then you have it interpreted by an expert. There's certain tests, whether it's for depression or anxiety, that those actual tests cannot, they're not released in the public domain. They can only be in the hands of a licensed professional.
Yeah.
You will hardly ever see it online. I think even from the uh, reputable internet sites, let's say like the Mayo Clinic, the Mayo Clinic will never say, I'm very sure there's a disclaimer that this is not a substitute for treatment.
Uh-huh.
Well, I have a disclaimer on my Instagram page that social media or anything you read or anything educative is never a substitute for personalized treatment
Mhm.
because everybody is different. It's
Yeah.
still, you cannot by a generalized checklist go, okay, that's it.
Mhm.
It's like you wouldn't marry somebody on a generalized checklist. Like they would, well,
No.
maybe you would never know. If you watch Indian matchmaking, yes, like generally, okay, they went to this school, they're this height, they're this color, fine. You want to meet them, you want to talk to them. It's the same with psychology.
Yeah. And okay, so as maybe a parent or a friend of an ADHD patient, how can we help? It's similar to the other question related to if we have a friend who suffers from depression or anxiety. Similarly, if someone suffers from ADHD, normally, because they can my cousin also suffers from ADHD, and they can get pretty restless, they can argue with you, they half the time, he especially used to suffer from this thing where he didn't know what he was saying, and he would get, everything would get so heated in the moment that you would not talk for several days. So as a friend or a parent of someone who suffers from ADHD, what can we do to help, not even fasten or speeden their recovery, just to support them throughout their journey? Because like you said, this is their path, this is something that this is their journey, and you can just support them, and you can be their pillar of support. So what should we do so that we can make everything easier and simpler for them?
Yeah, well, I think, again, a good question. I would start with language. Narrative is very important. Notice how you're saying they suffer from ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
The word suffering is what in part keeps the stigma going.
Yeah.
It may not be fun at times, but even with people without ADHD, a lot of times people without ADHD also have things going on, or they're not feeling so great, or so on and so forth. So when people like they suffer from depression, they suffer from, no, they have depression. End of story. We
Yeah.
need to take the suffering part out, right?
Mhm.
Just like when we say they committed suicide. I mean, that's basically the implication is like, did they commit a crime? No. The normalized way, destigmatized way to speak about mental health is to say they died by suicide.
Yeah.
It's the way they died, but they didn't commit anything, right? So number one, language is important. Number two, funnily, the one of and most people probably don't think about it like that. They're very outward focused. What can I do for the other person? Sorting yourself out is actually the greatest gift you can give another person. You know, if you're trying to be there for somebody who's maybe feeling really hyper or you know, in an intense moment, you're likely to lose your patience or get frustrated, which in turn doesn't help them.
Yeah.
So knowing when you've reached a boiling point or are about to, taking a step back, having some coping and calming techniques, boundaries, saying, you know, this is not personal, just going to give each other some space,
Yeah.
normalizing it, letting them do their thing can be really advantageous. Um, you know, it's also understanding, like, you know, previously when we were talking about, for example, your mother's response, like something's wrong with her son or my brother. Nothing's wrong. He just experiences the world in a different way.
Yeah.
So instead of being like, wow, they're suffering, there's something wrong, how about thinking of it, what can I learn from them? You know, what is right about this situation? How did they experience the world?
Mhm.
And then allowing, giving them that time and allowing them with that compassion and patience what they need. So, for example, if people have an official, let's say, ADHD diagnosis or dyslexia, you know, by law in many countries, they are by law able to get more exam time.
Mhm.
I don't
Happened
know
in
if you
our
know.
school as well. Mhm.
Yeah, exactly. These allowances. And that's great because that means you're respecting people who are neurodiverse. Everybody's neurological makeup is diverse. Why do I expect you to see to see the world the way I do?
Mhm.
So just keeping an open mind.
Yeah.
It's not nothing's wrong with them. I mean, there are people with Down syndrome that are the most pure and uncomplicated people ever, with so much generosity and love in their hearts. We should all learn from it.
Yeah. You learn something from everybody. You know,
Absolutely.
in our school as well, we've had lots of sessions with so our school has lots of people who have dyslexia, ADHD, Down syndrome, and on a daily basis, not on a daily basis, but like on a monthly basis, we have these interactive sessions together where you learn so much from them. You know, I like they teach you how to be sensitive. They teach you how to be grateful, and I'm so glad that our school has these sessions because sometimes you forget that being so preoccupied with your life or um, I don't know, but you learn something from someone every day, and that's just so important to understand. And we got a few questions today as well in a video form. I'll send them to you later, but I'll tell you what they said. One was that crying in front of someone can become it is so normal for a girl, but for a boy to do that, there's this again, this whole thing around it that you can't cry, you can't do this. But when a girl cries, you're just like, oh my god, we're here for you, we're here no matter what. But when a guy cries, you go like, why are you crying? That's not the right thing to do for you. So not asking what we should do to stop it, but why does this happen? Why is there this segregation between just a girl crying and a boy crying?
Yep. Well, that is part of dividing the world into sort of binaries and along gender lines. So, you know, women, in fact, it's unhealthy for both. You know, if you identify as male or female,
Mhm.
because it's upholding that all women are emotional, so that's okay to cry. But you know, if you don't cry, like for example, as a female politician, and you just hold your own, you're looked at as very sterile or cold or aggressive. You know, you're almost expected to cry and uphold some sort of gender stereotype. And as for men, that's That's what we call toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And it's degrading to women, and I'll tell you how. Because the idea is, why are you crying as a boy? Crying is weak. That's what girls do. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like, when they say don't run like a girl, I'm like, excuse me, why is running like a girl an insult? I mean, I know Olympic gold medalists that are women. So
Yeah.
what are you talking about in terms of run like a girl? I don't get it.
There's
And
this
these,
fantastic
again, language,
video.
this is, yeah, no, this is where it needs to be challenged. And I think, I mean, if any generation is going to do it, it's yours. I'm not even kidding. Like, that millennial wokeness hashtag is so important.
So
When I
there's this
see,
video on Instagram, which is exactly what you said right now. So there was this group of researchers that got so children between the age group of I think 5 to 8, and then they got children from the age group from 10 to 13. I think this was basically that. Then they asked them, "What is it like to run like a girl?" So the children who were younger were like running really fast, like this is what it's like to run like a girl. But the children from the age of 10 to 13 were just like, like mocking that, like that stereotype that girls run like this. Then they asked them, what is it like to throw like a girl? So
yeah,
the younger ones took a ball and like threw it like a yard away. And the elder ones were just like, "Ah." And then what is it like to fight like a girl? The younger
yeah,
ones started doing karate and showing off their skills, and these ones were just like, oh no, no, no. So
absolutely. It's effeminate. They're making more pronounced this sort of effeminate nature they assume every woman to have. And what's interesting is that starts even as a newborn. The research shows that newborn girls are held so fragile, like they're a teacup, they'll break. And newborn boys are like, yeah, they're guys, like rough and tumble. And then you get socialized and conditioned. Again, that goes back to what have you learned? There are studies that show if you give a math test to boys and girls and you have them put their name on the test, the girls perform worse because the act of writing their name is a subconscious prime that reminds them of their gender. So if you take a math test and you have to write Mehr, you remember
yeah.
subconsciously, I am a female.
Mm-hmm.
And we are taught that men are good at
Right.
science, right? And
Perfect.
math, and engineering, and STEM. But when you don't write your name on those tests, you just take them. Women score as well, if not better than men. So I mean, the first thing I say to my male clients in therapy is, you've probably been taught not to cry, that it's a sissy thing, it's a female thing, but it's not. To cry is to be human, and I hope you do. And you can't believe how many men start crying because they've had to keep it in, and it's so toxic. And
Yeah.
so men can't relate to their softer side,
Mm-hmm.
and the women can't relate to their tougher side, and everybody's suffering. So this is not a female problem or a male problem. It is a collective issue that we all need to tackle.
Yeah, I think that pretty much ends all of the questions that I had. And do you have any advice for any other teenager who suffers from, not even suffers, sorry, my bad, who has or thinks they have any I don't know if I've said this right. I'm so sorry. Any condition, because I don't want to be offensive to
Okay.
anything, any condition, or they or suffer or have any self-esteem or body related issues, and they're not happy with their body. Do you have any advice for any of us who goes through that?
Yeah. Um, if I told you that the world is flat,
Mm-hmm.
you're most likely not going to believe me, right? Because science has just proven that, or it's obviously not flat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Please realize with your mind and heart that about 95% of what you've been taught through society, culture, sometimes religion, school, institutions, parents, about 95% of what you taught is right up there with the world is flat. It's not true. And so one becoming sad or struggling with certain things did not happen overnight, right? It was a journey to, it's exactly what you're saying. The 3-year-old kids were just running and it's all good. And then you hit like a couple years later and you're like, wait, what just happened? Because every day they were being conditioned drop by drop. So all I will say is, it's not gonna, your mindset's not gonna change overnight,
Mm-hmm.
but it's also not going to take another 16 years.
Yeah.
If you keep at it, okay, if you speak to a professional, if you start like a focus or a study group or a book group with your like-minded friends,
Mm-hmm.
if you critically evaluate and debate questions and don't take everything at face value, instead of saying, wow, Kim Kardashian is so rich, she makes so much money. She does, but another question could be like, what would compel someone to have that much work done on their body? But we're not asking those questions.
No.
So it's about, when you're in a debate, it's about debating both sides of the issue. You need to look at it from a 360.
Mm-hmm.
Who is profiting from my misery?
Yeah.
There's no money to be made if you're happy with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
That's why pharma companies are like, but you're depressed. Here's medicine. Be hair free, smell like this, look like this, because it's a $1 trillion industry. Imagine if everyone goes, yeah, I have hair. Yeah, I don't need perfumes. I also don't need makeup. And I don't care about fashion. Oh, that's not really good for our capitalist society, is it?
No.
I mean, people are like, but Anjhula, you wore the same thing. I'm like, what's your point? That's the point of clothes. Like, honestly, it's your attitude. Then they're like, wow, that doesn't disturb her. And the thrill of trying to insult me is lost because
Mm.
what's your point? Genuinely, what's your point? You don't have one.
Yeah.
And that's always a work in progress. So all I would say is just keep going every day, one foot in front of the other, and collectively we'll all get there.
Yeah. One day at a time.
Exactly right. And sometimes it might be 1 hour at a time, but that's also a victory.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for coming
Right?
and
Absolutely.
answering all of these questions so brilliantly. It's so glad. I'm so glad to have like an expert to answer all of these questions because you can't completely trust the internet, especially when it comes to your mental health. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Bye. See
Take
you. Thank
care.
you.
Bye.